and welcome. Union Minister for Finance and Corporate Affairs Nirmala Sitharaman launched the asset monetization pipeline of central ministries and public sector entities on Monday, titled National Monetization Pipeline Volumes 1 and 2. The NMP estimates aggregate monetization potential of rupees 6 lakh crores through core assets of the central government over a 4-year period from fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2025. The centre plans to encourage both foreign and private investment to utilize or redevelop assets owned by the government and public sector undertakings or PSUs to unlock economic value. The Narendra Modi government is not selling either government-owned land or assets as part of its ambitious 6 lakh crore rupees asset monetization plan. Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said on Monday, the government's asset monetization plan spread across 4 years through 2024 to 25 encompasses assets like roads, power generation facilities, airports, ports, stadiums, warehouses, gas pipelines and railway stations and trains. The ownership of these assets listed for monetization remains with the government. There will be a mandatory handback. What is the asset monetization plan and how will it pan out? What is its role in our economy and what exactly are the benefits and challenges on its path? These and other issues we will discuss with our guests who are joining us. Dr. Ranjit Mehta, public policy expert, and also we are joined by Dr. Charan Singh, CEO of eGrow. A very warm welcome to both of you. Well, we'll be discussing on all that the finance minister said about the the asset monetization plan. But first of all, let's listen to what she said yesterday regarding this.
Are we selling away the lands? No, this infrastructure national monetization pipeline is talking about brownfield assets which need to be better monetized. Ownership of assets remains with the government and there will be a mandatory hand back. They'll have to give back after a certain time. So let there not be any confusion, oh, this government is selling away. No, these are assets, brownfield, which will be still with the ownership of the government. This is a transition. You're bringing in greater innovative ways of private participation.
And going back to our guests, Dr. Ranjit Mehta and Dr. Charan Singh. First of all, coming to you, Dr. Charan Singh, your thoughts on this, even as the finance minister announced the NMP, it was anticipated because it had been revealed in the budget this year itself. Your reactions?
One of the best measures that can be introduced in a constrained economy. As you know, it's almost a year that we have been hit by COVID. The whole world has been hit by COVID. And whenever there's a hit of that large extent, which happens once in 100 years, obviously the sources of revenue dry up. In such a situation, the government expenditure continues to take place. Salaries and wages have to be paid. Actually, government expenditure increases during these times. Hospitals, medicines, vaccines, these have to be done. Food support has to be provided. Where does the government raise resources? So I think this is a very innovative idea which the government has come out with. National monetization, national assets monetization plan. They rolled it out for 4 years. 6 lakhs is the target. For the current year, 88,000 crore is the target. And on an average, about 1.5 lakh crore. One thing I must mention, this is in a way bringing in capital expenditure. And the multiplier effect of capital expenditure is nearly 4 times than that of the revenue expenditure. So if the economy has to revive, I think this is one of the best measures that the government could have been announced during this time.
Right. Well, Dr. Ranjit Mehta, we just heard what Dr. Charan Singh has said. It's a big national effort, no doubt. So, and the amount, definitely huge, 6 lakh crore rupees to be earned in 4 years. What do we know about projects that have been identified which could be a major challenge, about the partners and so on. Your reactions or thoughts at the amount that the government has set as a target?
Thank you, Rukmaji. In fact, like Government of India has a vision to spend 111 lakh crores in next 5 years on infrastructure building, which is very badly needed. And I completely agree with Dr. Charan saying, because of the COVID, most of the money is going towards the social needs and uplifting the poor, and also towards economic packages the Government of India had announced. And this was quite unexpected during this time. And there's a substantial interest from long-term investors to invest in India's infrastructure also. Now, there are many assets which are lying idle. Given India's massive and stable demand, operational infrastructure assets generate long-term inflation-indexed cash flows, which are highly conducive to institutional capital deployment. And many institutions, they have shown interest in India's infrastructure. So monetization of infrastructure assets will have a true prolonged benefits. It will yield appropriate return for the concerned PSU and for the government, and also promote balanced regional development. Now, an investable capital, it is learned that an investable capital of around $29 billion is believed to be committed for investing in India by pension funds, by sovereign wealth funds, and infrastructure funds. However, to access this global capital, we need to create a robust asset pipeline and package it with the right structure and vehicles. Therefore, the Government of India has taken a right decision by monetizing its brownfield assets. Especially, there are 5 very critical sectors here, like road, railways, and gas pipelines. I think these are very important, and this is the right way to do at this point of time to get that extra revenue. And monetization as a mechanism to finance infrastructure has been successfully employed by many nations like Australia and US. So we can also do it in India. NHAI has done monetization of its toll in past. So therefore, it's a right step at the right time. And with this proper institutional mechanism, we can generate this extra revenue to build the world-class infrastructure which is badly needed in India as we grow in double digits in times to come.
Right, the right action, a right step at the right time. Coming to you, Dr. Charan Singh, a key part of the NMP is that the government is not giving its assets away. It's the PPP model, if I'm correct. How would companies be looking at this proposal at this point?
So you're very right. The ownership does not go. So the ownership stays with the public sector and the government. Now that is very important. There can be critics which would say that you, in times of distress, you are doing distress selling and not getting the right price. So that criticism has been taken care by saying that the ownership doesn't go. The other is the pricing. On the pricing, there's going to be bidding. That means there will be an auction. So in an auction, the best bidder gets it. So it's very, very profitable. Now, what I would like to mention here as an answer to your question is, look at the variety of segments that they have opened, and different segments would have different strategies. They have opened roads, railways, power transmission, telecom, power generation, natural gas pipeline, petroleum goods, warehousing assets, mining, then sports stadium. Now this I think is very innovative. As was just mentioned previously by Dr. Ranji, Australia has experimented it. And Australia has basically done the ports and transmission. But in India, we are expanding it. Now, just take the simple example of a stadium. Now, if a stadium which has been built at a huge cost is sitting idle, the owner of the stadium, maybe the local body, the municipal corporation, or maybe the state government is getting no revenue out of it. Now suddenly, once you put the stadium in use and offer it, you can imagine the uses a stadium can do. There are so many sports activities at the school level, at the college level, NCC, NSS. There can be marriage functions, there can be religious functions and spiritual needs. The stadium can be put to use constantly 24/7. And now who's going to benefit? Anybody who's participating in this exercise. If it is a municipal corporation, if it is the state government, suddenly the stadium becomes a source of great revenue. Also, the stadium becomes a source of great comfort for the local population that it serves. So therefore, anybody who's offering, and these are the sectors which I mentioned, in different sectors, different entities will be engaged. Whichever entity has an asset. I'll give you another example. You know, you and me, all of us in India have seen that railways have huge land, huge places. They have their own stadiums, they have their own hospitals. And you will agree with me, many government public sector undertakings have their own housing schemes, which means houses are available. And we have seen many of them are sitting, many of the houses in such housing schemes are sitting vacant. Whereas people like to own their own house, housing loans have become easy, people want to own an asset, and therefore this public asset of the government, houses, or the railway hospitals, or railway land is lying idle. Now railways own it. If suddenly we can monetize that whole place, just imagine the revenue that it generates for the public sector entity. So therefore, I think it is a win-win for all. It is going to benefit everybody. It will also benefit the local population where these assets exist.
Right. At this point, we're joined by economic journalist Shubham Bhattacharjee. A very warm welcome to you, sir, as well. We are looking at it as a very big national effort, sir. 6 lakh crores to be earned in 4 years. Can we say that the projects have been identified? Would that be a major hurdle that has got away with, that has been done away with? Also identification of partners who would be part of this entire implementation of this entire pipeline.
Yeah, there won't be any one space identification. What we're essentially looking at is that here, as Dr. Singh was pointing out and Ms. Mehta was pointing out, essentially the government will periodically come up with sets of projects, and these projects will be picked up by the relevant entities in the private sector, and they will then run it. The advantage of this scheme or this asset monetization pipeline is it removes two major bottlenecks. In India, to start any project, you need a considerable pre-project work in terms of getting clearances. Clearance for land, clearance for environment, clearance for lots of stuff. None of those clearances are necessary for these projects because these projects are already there for which they are in place. So whether it's a road project, whether it's a housing project, whether it's a port, whether it's railways, they all have the clearances. The government simply has to give it over to the private sector at an agreed revenue share formula for the project to start earning income. So essentially the investor also knows that how much, right at the beginning, is the cost that the person has to defray. There are no surprises, and often where these unwelcome surprises are not there. That is the very major part of this project. So essentially the moment, I agree with when you say that whether projects have been identified, that is often a major challenge in India. That have we got the projects ready? Are these projects in time? For next year, what will be the table of, what will be the menu of projects? Actually, you really don't need to spend time on thinking of those sort of stuff. You can bring an asset to the table and expect it to be picked up immediately
once the contract is signed, and the project can start delivering. For instance, if it's a port, it's not as if somebody has to start building a greenfield port. The project port is already there. You simply show your efficiency in how best you can extract more revenue from that project, from that port, and share revenue with the government on the basis of the concession agreement that will be agreed on. This is actually rather good, because in India our biggest challenge has been for getting clearances. If you look at the stable of the ministries in terms of projects held back, you find it's the clearances which hold back projects. This pipeline doesn't have any of that cholesterol at all. Yes.
Right. Right. Well, we'll be coming back to our discussion, but right here on In Focus, it's time for a short break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Yeah, look at that.
With the world's largest COVID vaccination drive, India is leading the way. As the vaccine reaches every corner of the nation, do not forget the mantra, Dawai bhi, Kadai bhi. Let's continue our fight against COVID-19. Vaccination along with social distancing, sanitization and masks.
Mask up, India!
Put your mask on and cover your nose and be safe.
Mask Up India.
Welcome back. You're watching In Focus, and we are discussing the national monetization pipeline that was announced by the Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman yesterday. Well, coming to you, Dr. Ranjit Mehta, as we were discussing with Dr. Charan Singh, a key part of the pipeline is that the government is not giving anything away. None of the assets, whether land or any other assets, are going to be given away. It's the PPP model. How would you judge the viability? What would you say would be the viability of such a vision in view of all that has gone before as far as PPP models are concerned?
Yes, you see, the government, the assets are with government. They are not selling it. They are only monetizing it. Now, this is a move from privatization to structured partnerships. These are the structured partnerships which the government is making and bringing in the private sector efficiencies which they can use in operation of these assets and bring in money for the government sector. Now, first, monetization needs to be it needs to be repositioned as a tool to leverage institutional capital. Now, structures such as TOT, InvITs bring in private sector efficiencies in managing and operating assets under well-defined regulatory framework. So, therefore, the private sector will also not have any problem, since they don't have to take a permission and they'll be readily available for monetization. And of course, there is a need. To carefully manage stakeholders, regulatory and structural issues which create formal as well as informal barriers normally in these kind of things. So monetization needs to be made a value accretive for entities undertaking the transactions. So it is very important that those entities should have trust in us, and this is the one of the most needed step the government of India has taken at the right time, because we cannot leave our infrastructure in the shape where it is. If we want to compete in a global level, then our infrastructure has to be world class, and to build up a world class infrastructure we need money, and to get the money at this point of time, this asset monetization of brownfield projects which have been identified by Government of India is a significant step, and it's a very important step, and I'm sure that we are going to have a lot of investments through these projects, and that too without selling these assets, and assets are there itself.
Right. Shubham, when we talk about 6 lakh crore rupees that the government has set as its target, while accepting that it is achievable, it is a target. How would you describe? How would companies be looking at the PPP model that is being presented to them? Because none of the assets will be given away.
This is something that, Smitha was just talking about. Let's put it simply. There will be banks, for instance, or there will be insurance companies, there are public sector companies which the government is planning to privatize. This asset monetization is not part of that. This is plain and simple government property which it holds, and it is simply lying fallow. These are the stuff which are simply lying there, which the government is saying, you Mr. Private Sector, would you want to take this particular asset and generate revenue from it? To the private sector company, it doesn't really matter that it is not being privatized, because that is not the reason why these assets are not working. The assets are not working simply because they are not being utilized. And why they are not being utilized? Because the government doesn't have the money to do the capital expenditure to be able to milk these projects, milk these assets. So what does the private sector company do in, say, as I said, in any of the sectors? It takes the project for 30 years, 40 years, depending on how the concession agreement will be worked out. And it knows that now there is certainty. For 40 years, this asset belongs to me. It doesn't matter whether it's being privatized or not, because that is not something that is the reason why this project was not working. It was not working because there was no adequate capital being pumped into that particular asset. Whether it's a piece of land, whether it's a port, whether it's an airport, it's not being worked out adequately. So the private sector company says, depending on its efficiency, it raises the capital, it creates revenue for itself. The asset is there. The asset banks will be willing to give the money for that project because there is a clear lease. To put a simple example, Hong Kong was on lease from the British government for 99 years. Did it stop Hong Kong from becoming what it was today? Well, essentially, any asset, any government asset anywhere across the world is always given out on lease. And this is the same model. It is being given out on lease to the private sector company to use it for a well-defined, well-structured number of years. It will not, and the company does then company milks that asset for the revenue. It's not going to pick up the land to be able to sell it. That's not the whole idea. It's a government land which if it tries to sell it out, do fast sale. For instance, what will it do with a port? It can't keep on, we keep on looking at the land as the reason why a private sector will want to pick it up. But most companies are not looking at land buying and selling. They're not real estate companies. A port company, an airport company, a road infrastructure company, they want to use it to be able to create far more revenue, to be able to to from that running asset. And here, since the asset has come to them directly based on the concession agreement that will be worked out, the government was talking about proper KPIs and others that will be worked out, which is very necessary because every sector will need specific projects will need specific contracts. The projects will be there for them to utilize, generate revenue, create profits, pay back to the banks, and then at the end of the concession agreement, which is 30-40 years, return it back to the government. That is how most countries milk their infrastructure assets. So I don't think the privatization issue is germane here at all.
Right. Well, Dr. Charan Singh, well, the most successful in this respect, are roads so far. How do you see it being implemented further as part, highways are part of the assets, the monetization of assets that have been mentioned specifically, 1.6 lakh crore from roads. In fact, if I'm correct, we've already seen various examples of that, but of course under the pipeline system, national monetization pipeline system, that entire system will go even further. It will not be just about particular bodies collecting toll tax and so on. Could you describe it more for us, elaborate on it more for us, how you see it?
So taking that discussion further, which has been so beautiful so far and very, very enriching, I would like to mention one thing as an economist. And seeing the economy where it is, knowing the potential of the economy where it should be, given the dream of the Prime Minister, it should touch $5 trillion. Of course, there's been a little setback because of COVID, and a $10 trillion. And to be amongst the best economies in the world in years to come, what is more important? We have the demographic dividend in our country. We need to create employment. We have shortage of capital in the country. So labor is there, capital is short. So do fresh investment, the greenfield investment is going to be time consuming. There's a gestation period, whereas the brownfield projects are sitting there. So now just imagine how innovative this project is. And I really thank Niti Aayog and the government to have thought about it. The assets are already there. So the capital cost is saved. People are available. They can be engaged. And you can revive the economy by creating many more employment opportunities by this asset monetization scheme. How successful it will be, time will tell. I'm sure if it is marketed properly, as I give you the example of a stadium, just imagine the potential it has. I live in Delhi, and just imagine roads get blocked on these festival days. And if we could concentrate the festivals in the stadiums are designed to hold 25,000 to 50,000 people. They have rooms, they have club rooms. So the amount of festivities that can be contained in the stadium, they have parking slots available. Just imagine, it creates fresh employment. It creates fresh employment, not only the people who are manning it, it creates lots of business opportunities for, the mudra loans being given to that segment of the society which has suffered a lot because there's so much of informal sector in the country, and it gives lots of employment to the informal sector. So that is one thing which I wanted to add in the discussion. Now you brought the point of the roads. To me, I really do not know how the model is going to play out, how the contracts are going to be signed. Certainly, it is a sort of a lease model, like Hong Kong example given was beautiful, 99-year lease. Similarly, I think, once you offer the road, there is a toll. But you can use the road for many other purposes. You can use the road for creating infrastructure around that. You can create entertainment, you can create a shopping mall. I want to bring one thing to your notice here. During my studies abroad, I used to find not a single railway station as just a station with a shed, the train comes and the train goes, and one newspaper vendor and one idli vendor. No. In foreign countries, where they've done lots of asset monetization and build infrastructure projects, the railway stations serve as a hub of business. They have shopping malls over it, they have restaurants, they have eating places, they have entertainment centers, all knitted together. You come to the railway station, and now you have everything there together. I think the same thing we can do for the roads. All the roads, once we give them, and it should be built into the contract, the road given to the private sector should not just be the toll, and you know that in our country, in the past, sometimes toll bridges have been impacted and local population has not liked it. So there has to be more incentive than the tolls, and that can be built in. Suppose at the toll center, you have a shopping complex above the toll. So therefore, you monetize that, and when the bidding takes place, you get the best out of it. In my mind also, there is another thing that comes. You can take the help of the local municipal corporation if you are connecting to a road to two major towns or two major markets, say Sikandrabad and Hyderabad for example, then you can create a sort of infrastructure around that road. I used to travel a lot from Bangalore to Chennai by road. The roads are beautiful, but there are no shopping complexes, no restaurants, no rest washrooms available. So you can use while bidding out the road, you can allow them to have more revenue points, revenue earning points alongside the road, and that will get you much more money.
Right. The creation of revenue points, as Dr. Charan Singh has said, creative thinking of how to use a road for more than just collecting toll tax. Well, when we talk about roads, or when we talk about stadium as the example that he has given, it could be the revival of many assets that are dead. Would you agree, Dr. Mehta?
Yes, 100%. I'm glad that Dr. Charan Singh has brought out the issue of our demographic dividend. Because we need to create a lot of jobs for our young people, around 6 to 7 million young people who are going to join the workforce in next every year. That is the figure that we have. Now, Dr. Charan Singh has rightly said that our roads are still underutilized. Though there is a plan of Government of India for redevelopment of railway stations, there are railway stations, even bus stations are being, transformed now. There is, these are being given for remodeling, for redevelopment to the private sector. Such examples have been seen in Gujarat, in Surat, Baroda. But these kind of, I know of the Ministry of Road, Transport and Highways, they have a plan to redevelop their bus stations, and there are, as Mr. Dr. Singh said, there are creative thinking. So this is definitely a part of creative thinking, that the bus stations can be remodeled, railway stations are being now given to private sector to work on PPP modes, and there are many other things, like there are 5 basic sectors they have been identified in this monetization pipeline plan by Government of India. Road is one of them, power sector is there, oil and gas sector is there, and also we have this telecom sector. And all these sectors, right now we were only using, especially when you talk about the road sector, for toll collection. But there are so many other things. So, we have witnessed in the development of other countries. Like today, take the example of America. So, America is rich because it has beautiful roads. That is the underlying statement. The point is this: wherever the roads go, any money spent on infrastructure generates 2.5 around 2.5 times to the economy. Therefore, we need to build these roads. To build these roads, then definitely we need this kind of monetization plan. Government of India needs finances. So therefore, we need to think more creatively that how we can really monetize our other assets, which, like we were discussing before, that Indian Railways have so much of land, which is a plan in this monetization plan also. I think that these are very creative ideas, and these asset monetizations, when undertaken effectively, can deliver infinite value from the infrastructure assets, and which will not only create actually substantial impact, but also help in creating new and world-class infrastructure for India, which is needed very, very badly.
And all the while generating much needed employment from the building of these grand infrastructure projects, as well as the various revenue points, as Dr. Charan Singh was saying, and so on. Shubham, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, you must be wondering, if it was so good, then why weren't we doing this earlier?
Yes.
The point about all this is there's something there's a missing link, and what the missing link out here is that what you are and everybody else has pointed out as the risk that the private sector is not getting the asset and ownership was actually the problem area. Whenever the government transferred assets to private sector, the private sector had to first put up a lump sum to buy the assets, and there would always be dispute about whether the amount that has been paid, whether it has reflected the true value of the asset, and that always made private sector companies, the good private sector companies you've noticed, have often been very reluctant to engage with the government on this asset sale.
Right.
So there have been a reason for it, and that was the problem. The second problem is that when the government says, national government now, hopefully the state governments very soon, that we want you to use the asset, there has to be a sense of certainty. So two of these problems was what was holding back this particular route. This has been talked about for several years, that we need to basically make the assets work. But it was difficult to do so without transferring the property, and secondly, to give the certainty. Over years, we have developed experience in different sectors, as Dr. Charan was pointing out, Dr. Mehta was pointing out, in how to work these contracts that are fair for everybody and basically therefore are transparent. Let me give an example.
So Shubham, when you say that, that was a major challenge, the fact that the private party wanted ownership. So what has changed now, in your opinion?
No, that's the point. What I'm saying is that the big companies, the better companies didn't want ownership change, which is why you found the large industrial groups in India did not participate in government's disinvestment program.
Right.
There was a reason for it. There was a reputation risk. These companies work they have shareholders in India and abroad. They would want transparency, and there's lots of issues that go into it. And that is where the problem was coming in. These assets that we are talking about are not big ones in terms of sales. They are also not the ones which need sales of assets to be able to make them work. What they need is certainty of contract that this will last for at least 3 decades, 4 decades, for the assets to be utilized properly. Yes. Once that is done, then a group, which is, whether it can be a new entrepreneurial group or it can be an old established industrial house, gets the confidence that we can work on a transparent basis. It also gives the people the confidence that their asset, which has been built up through public money, the taxpayers' money, has been utilized and is not being used for private enrichment. The asset still remains with the government, and that's the fundamental thing. Now, this is a policy on, this is almost like a technology which was not possible to do earlier on when the governments did not have the requisite capacity to do this sort of a division of responsibility. Let's put it this way. For instance, coal mines. Coal India has got lots of coal mines, about 400 of them. The best coal mines are those which are run by mine development operators. That means the Coal India gives it out to mining companies who have the expertise in mining the coal and deliver the maximum value for Coal India. That's the reason why Coal India's production has begun to rise after several decades after several years of being flat. And today now Coal India is able to get in a much more comfortable way. It's getting the revenue share, which is allowing it to be a much more profitable company. It's the same model. Coal India is not giving over the mine to the mining company. The mining company is using its expertise to generate revenue, obviously by bringing out more coal. That is the same model that is sought to be out here. It is sought to be used here. Will it be successful for all the sectors? I'm not very sure, but it will be successful for quite a few sectors where there are already private sector capacity has been built up. And these are the places where we can use the government ownership with the private sector utilization, with a terminal date that by this date it will be handed over back to the government. So nothing really goes out from the government, and nothing, the government also doesn't have to wrestle with the problem of determining what is the current asset value of an item which for in the future, which has been the subject of so many CAG audits. You don't have to do it, you're not selling it. So that makes it much more easy for the ministries to concentrate on creating contracts which are standardized, and that's where NITI Aayog is coming in, to create a uniform set of contracts for these sectors to be able to just see that how the revenue share works when there is no transfer of capital. You know, the capital stays with the private sector, the asset stays with the government. It's a peaceful setup. The moment you do a change, the government is selling the assets, it creates problems of accountability in lots of ways. No matter how we approach it, different governments across India have tried this. It doesn't work. There will always be a problem there. It has been worked out in some disinvestment in some of the areas, that's strategic privatization, and that takes a lot of time and effort, as we are seeing happening over cases like BPCL and a couple of other companies, and it will happen. But that's a separate timeline, a separate pipeline altogether. This is something which doesn't require that sort of a complication. You simply allow the company to use it and use it better and create a revenue share model which allows you to create maximum revenue. For instance, you could say that in Jaipur city, I want street lighting and of this particular capacity. I'm not handing over the street to the company. I'm not saying that those street lamps will belong to the company, but you will create that much amount of revenue from it. There is ways to extract money from the government and the private sector by doing that sort of a process. And that is what the monetization pipeline is doing. As I say, it couldn't have happened earlier because it required a lot of years of training, a lot of years of work. Dr. Charan Singh has been involved in several of those projects and schemes. He would be able to elucidate better. But it has taken us time to reach, which is why we can now say with a relative degree of confidence that this can happen.
Right.
Yeah.
The confidence that this can happen, and Dr. Charan Singh, when I just listened to Shubham and he was telling us about the kind of benefits that are there, you've also told us it's the revival of dead assets at one end, the maintenance of various assets that just lie empty and vacant. Stadium, for example, except for particular seasons in the year, and they can be used throughout the year now, and they can be maintained also. Museums, maybe libraries, massive buildings that are just lying vacant, land and so on. Not only do these assets come alive, they all, and it also leads to revenue for the government without the government having to spend any more, and also the ultimate beneficiary is the common man. Would you agree?
Totally agree. And tell you something more, and he was very right. When I buy something and I have to invest money and I have to sink in, I do not know the risk of it, I really am very worried. But now, when the money has already been sunk, I have seen it operate, I can think of innovative ways of making money out of it. I am more adventurous and I can experiment. If I succeed, fine, otherwise I can replace with another alternative. So the private sector also benefits. Now they have an asset which is sitting ready, and now with that asset, they're going to experiment on innovative ideas. Now look at the ports. Suppose there is 2 ports given to me, one at Cochin and one at Goa. I can run all type of luxury liners from Goa to Cochin for all fun activities, as well as I can do something for people who are in business. If they start on a weekend and are ready to go and work in Cochin on Monday, they can go by a cruise liner. I can have restaurants there. I can also have a water floating restaurant for the local people. Just imagine how much potential the private sector can bring in if an asset which has already been created, they don't have to sink money. They can only think innovatively of raising revenue and profits. Now, once the private sector, which is very innovative, risk-taking, generally creative, gets an opportunity like this, who benefits? The tax authorities benefit. They get higher taxes from higher profits. Employment benefits. The young country gets so much employment opportunity, and then everybody in that area can build further infrastructure. If a good restaurant comes up in a port area, just imagine the subsidiaries that benefit from that. If a good housing complex comes out serving 2 ports and people can come and reside here overnight, then imagine the subsidiary industries that come up. So therefore, the infrastructure gets an impetus. That is why it is considered by economists that infrastructure expenditure, capital expenditure leads to the multiples are much high. I'll give you one simple example. You know Gujarat is a dry state. You know Madhya Pradesh is not a dry state. Now what happens? I've lived in Baroda for many years. Now what happens? People will look for the nearest octroi point, go across, buy liquor, a same item, and come back. Government doesn't get revenue out of it. It just bids, and so much of leakage takes place. Now I have a toll bridge at this junction. I have authority to open a restaurant above this. I can, instead of this bootlegging and all this spurious liquor, all this where I lose all the revenue, I can properly set up a restaurant and I benefit. Employment benefits, the government benefits, the private sector benefits. So when the private sector benefits, I want to make it very clear. At the end of the day, who benefits? It is private sector is going to either go and buy luxurious items, industry benefits, going to keep employees, employment benefits, create assets, build bungalows, houses, infrastructure benefits. So therefore, you have to keep the wheel of the economy moving. And I think that asset monetization scheme is basically keeping the wheel of the economy moving. And many innovative ideas will come up once you engage the private sector and show them that these are the profit-making avenues available to you.
It's clearly a very long-range visionary plan. Coming to you, Dr. Mehta, well, we are looking at it as the fact that since there is no transfer of ownership, this is a key point, we believe, from our discussions, that which is actually a boon and could in fact attract more players, more private players into this vision, into this plan, into this pipeline.
Yes, in fact, in the beginning only I said that definitely, we need lot of institutional investors in Indian infrastructure to invest, and to do that, we have made this structured partnership through this National Asset Monetization Plan, which the Government of India has envisioned. And there's a lot of money through InvITs or REITs. So, like the many pension funds in Canada and other countries who would like to invest in Indian infrastructure. But to do that, we need to give them a system which is structured, which is reliable, and which is sustainable. And to give them, because we have a lot of capital for investment, we need a lot of money to build our infrastructure. And we have seen especially that how the infrastructure cramped during the COVID time, supply chains got disrupted. So therefore, this kind of things does not take place again. We need this sustainable infrastructure, and to do this, we have created this structured partnership plan to bring the foreign investors or other institutional investors in Indian infrastructure through this National Monetization Plan. It's a great idea and initiative by Government of India.
Yes, Shubham, very quickly, because we are really running out of time, we can safely assume that there would be no resistance from the entities that own these assets right now.
That's right. You moderated a nice discussion, so thank you for that. But what essentially happens is foreign funds or large investor funds do not want reputational risk. An asset changeover or that sort always carries that sort of a risk. They wouldn't want to take one. They would rather want to milk any asset. Just as they do in the stock market, they would want to do it for the longer term assets and then get out. That is the way capital operates, and that is the best tool. So, waiting for somebody to turn up for sales would have actually meant that nobody would have come. And when we are trying to attract a lot of FDI into our economy, this is the way to go. It's not surprisingly that it's a surprise that this plan is being looked at with favor, because essentially it gives capital, as Rameta was pointing out, long-term pension funds, long-term insurance funds, the chance to come in, and that is where the risk is off, because they also have a reputation to maintain. The other part of it is that this is actually also very comfortable for ministries. State government or central government ministries are not equipped often to run these assets. They are not built to do that. They set policies, they do other sort of stuff. To force them to be running these assets was actually putting a lot of pressure on.
Yes, very quickly, the role of states and the synergy that needs to be maintained between centre and states, now always a major challenge. Dr. Charan Singh, I think you would like to say something about that very quickly, because we just have about a minute. Yeah.
Yes, I'm so happy that the government has come up with a scheme, and this is basically the dead assets in that sense. Dead assets, inverted commas. Maybe if the scheme is successful, the government may consider a similar, and should consider, it's my suggestion, of working, moving, live assets also. And they can give an opportunity to the private sector to run it, share the profits, and the ownership stays with the government, but the government need not support them through budget every now and then. So I think if this scheme, which should serve as a base scheme, is successful, the government can think innovatively of those industries, those institutions, those firms, financial institutions, of letting the private sector run it. It is like, as you know, test drives, or it is something like keep it for 30 days. If it works for you, good. Otherwise, you can return it. Something like that needs to be done. Government should be in the business of governance, not in the business of doing business. Thank you.
Right. Well, so the National Monetization Pipeline, a grand scheme, part of a major vision for the future of India, a new India where ease of living is paramount, where revenue is generated, and infrastructure is developed in every way, and the citizen, the common man, is the major beneficiary. Many thanks to our guests on the show for joining us here, Dr. Charan Singh, Dr. Ranjit Mehta and Shubham Bhattacharjee, and to all our viewers for tuning in. Well, the NMP, as envisaged, is to serve as a medium-term asset monetization pipeline. Well, that's all we have for you in this edition of In Focus. Many thanks for joining in and watching us. Namaskar.